Are you rushing past men again, without looking? The hall seemed to ask as the flag rope clicked softly in the morning draft. People scoffed when the quiet janitor slowed their path, pressed him back with glances, yet he didn't answer, just held his breath for one steady beat. Then a thin glint slipped from his jacket, a proof token catching the amber light, while the room fell into a heartbeat hush. Still quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back to when the hall first froze. The main hall carried a soft amber glow, that veterans' week morning sunlight drifting through tall windows and catching on rows of folding chairs, still waiting to be straightened. People moved in and out, with mild purpose, their footsteps echoing lightly against the freshly polished floor. Walt Kerrigan worked in slow circles near the center aisle, his mop gliding the way. An old routine glides quiet, steady, never rushed. His left knee bothered him on cold days, so he favored that leg without thinking, leaning slightly as he moved. The hall rose around him, like a place he understood better than most, a room he had earned a kind of peace inside. Then a young voice cut through. "Sir, you're cutting my path. I need through." Devon Hale, still carrying the sharp breath of a hurried morning, strode in wearing his duty blues. His boots squeaked a crisp note across the glossy floor as he stepped straight through the path Walt had just cleared, cutting through his quiet routine before Walt even had time to turn fully. A few heads turned. Someone murmured, "He's always too slow." Another voice lowered to a whisper, as if judgment were best delivered behind a cupped hand. Walt paused only a beat, the mop angled downward, the handle resting lightly against his palm. "You're good, son," he said, stepping back with a small nod. His voice held the calm weight of a man used to being overlooked. But when he turned to resume his work, the edge of something metallic slipped into view, just a thin glint from inside his jacket, barely more than a sliver of light. It flashed once before the fabric settled, swallowed back into the quiet of his coat. Devon noticed it. The flash lingered in his mind longer than it should have. Walt dipped the mop again, the gentle swish returning like an old melody. He didn't rush, didn't defend himself, didn't seem bothered by the small cluster of eyes on him. Dust motes drifted in the sunbeam beside him, rising and falling with each pass of the mop. Still, Devon slowed his steps. Something about the janitor's calm after being cut off, after being spoken to like a traffic cone, didn't sit right. The room hummed with small conversations about the upcoming rehearsal chairs scraping across the floor, papers shuffling at the sign-in table. But Devon found himself listening for the old man's voice instead. He heard nothing. Walt stayed bent to his task, quietly tending the section Devon had just walked through. His face carried no complaint, no disappointment, no irritation, just a soft, practiced patience that felt out of place in a morning that rushed everyone else forward. Devon found his spot near the stage, but he kept glancing back once, twice, a third time. The janitor moved with a steady care that felt almost ceremonial. Each stroke of the mop deliberate, each pause between movements, just long enough to let the hall breathe. Something tugged at Devon's attention again, how Walt had stepped aside, how he had answered with respect he didn't owe, how he held himself with the quiet force of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be sure of who he was. And Devon couldn't shake how calm the old man stayed after being cut off. The morning's rehearsal bustle drifted into the side office where Ms. Whitcomb kept her clipboard, her hair pinned tight the way rules get pinned to bulletin boards. Devon stood across from her, shoulders squared but voice a little uncertain as he retold what happened. "I'm just saying, he insisted the janitor caused a bit of a delay out there." Ms. Whitcomb tapped her pen twice, a habit that made even simple comments feel like infractions. "He blocked your path, well, he was in it." She didn't look up. "I'll speak to him." The words traveled quicker than the truth they carried. Walt was wiping down a cart near the supply room door when she approached. Her heels clicked a practiced rhythm across the hallway tiles. "Mr. Kerrigan," she said not unkindly, but clipped. A reminder that staff should avoid bringing any personal objects while on duty. It creates confusion. Walt straightened, hands resting on the handle of the cart. He didn't argue, didn't ask what she meant. He simply nodded once. "Understood, ma'am." "Good. We need everything smooth this week." She moved on before silence had time to settle. Walt stepped back into the supply room and let the door hush closed behind him. The wooden locker waited in its familiar corner, its hinges softened from years of opening only for him. He reached for it slowly, as though time inside the room moved differently, gentler maybe. From the hallway, Ellie's sneakers squeaked a cheerful path toward him. "Grandpa, you all right?" she asked, poking her head in before he even answered. He gave her a warm half-smile. "Doing fine, sweetheart." But inside the locker, resting where he left it long ago, the metal sat pinned to the inside of his work jacket. The fabric had faded around it, sun-washed along the seams, but the metal still carried a life of its own. He touched it carefully, thumb tracing the edge the way someone might touch a photograph they hadn't looked at in years. The choir's rehearsal drifted faintly from the auditorium, soft scales rising, falling, finding their place. The printer in the library down the hall coughed out pages in patient bursts. Ordinary sounds, but they filled the quiet with a kind of steady comfort. Still, the yellow light above him caught on the metal just right, making his hand tremble when he tried to unfasten it. He stilled himself, breathing once, twice. His fingers managed the clasp with a familiarity that hadn't left him. He removed the metal, gently laying it across his palm. It had been years since he held it this openly, not shielded by fabric or routine. The tiny scratches along its surface stood like proof of something he never talked about, proof no one here seemed to imagine existed. Ellie stepped closer. "You sure you're okay?" "Course I am," he said softly, but he closed the locker a little more slowly than before. The hallway seemed longer when they walked out together, sunlight spilling unevenly across the floor. Walt slipped the metal into an inner pocket, hidden but no longer forgotten. He returned to his cart, the same steady pace, but the morning felt heavier somehow, like a story being misread by people who'd only scanned the first line. Across the hall, Devon stepped out from behind a row of folded chairs. He watched Walt move, watched the quiet patience in every step. And Devon kept remembering that glint from inside the janitor's jacket. Rows of chairs waited in uneven lines across the main hall, their metal legs catching the morning haze. Walt began straightening them one by one, each motion careful and deliberate. He lifted a seat, nudged it into place, stepped back to check the angle, then moved on. It wasn't speed that mattered to him, only making sure every chair stood steady for whoever needed it. Devon entered from the wings, his pace slowing without his permission. He watched the old janitor work the measured rhythm of someone who understood that small tasks could carry quiet dignity. Walt reached the end of a row just as an older veteran shuffled in, searching for a place to sit. "Easy there," Walt murmured, offering an arm. The veteran leaned into him with a grateful sigh. Walt guided him gently to a chair near the aisle, lowering him into it with both hands steady. Devon felt something pull in his chest, something like recognition, though he didn't have a name for it yet. Ellie slipped in from the side ponytail, bouncing, as she approached her grandfather. "Grandpa," she whispered, "can I see that thing again?" Walt hesitated only a second before reaching beneath his jacket. The metal slid into view, resting against his palm as naturally as breath. Ellie touched its edge, her small fingers tracing a line along the metal. A faint scratch glimmered across one side. "It came from your time, Grandpa," she asked. Walt shook his head slowly. No, he said. It belonged to someone I promised to remember. The words drifted into the open space between them, soft, but heavy with meaning. Devon caught them from a few steps away, and for the first time his stance shifted. The impatience from earlier loosened its grip. Then Ellie tilted the metal slightly, noticing another mark near the clasp, a second scratch deeper and older. She brushed it carefully, as if afraid to disturb whatever history lived there. Walt closed his fingers around the metal, holding it, with a reverence Devon hadn't expected. The hall buzzed with quiet activity, shuffling feet, distant voices, but Devon found himself listening only to the tone of Walt's voice, the kind you hear from someone who's carried more than they've ever put into words. You were close to him, Ellie asked. Walt nodded once, close enough to carry his memory forward. Ellie leaned her head against his arm for a moment, before stepping back to help him with the chairs. Walt moved slowly to the next row, adjusting each seat, checking the legs, brushing dust from a backrest. Devon realized he wasn't just cleaning, he was preparing a place for others, with a kind of respect that didn't ask to be noticed. Devon stood there longer than he meant to, watching the quiet way Walt honored people without needing acknowledgement. Something deepened inside him, a shift he couldn't quite explain. The man he'd misread earlier wasn't just slow or in the way. He was careful, purposeful, steady in a world that rushed past him. The hall lights' dimmed rehearsal call echoed, pulling everyone in. The main hall settled into its rehearsal hush, the kind that felt almost ceremonial. Rows of chairs stood perfectly aligned, stage lights warming the wooden risers, and the faint rustle of programs drifted through the air. Voices softened as veterans, volunteers, and staff gathered for the run-through of the veterans' ceremony. Walt carried a stack of folded flags toward the side table, his step steady, his expression composed. Ellie followed close behind, with a roll of tape, glancing at him now and then, as though sensing something unspoken beneath his quiet routine. Ms. Whitcomb swept through the aisle with her clipboard tucked beneath her arm. Mr. Kerrigan, she called, her tone precise, one more reminder. Please remove any decorative items that aren't part of regulation attire. Walt paused. The room stilled in a small ripple, like a curtain being tugged. He looked down at his jacket, at the weight beneath the fabric that he had carried for years, tucked away from attention. He slipped his fingers along the inner seam, then exhaled. He removed the jacket slowly. The metal gleamed on his chest, pinned just over his heart. A clean beam from the overhead lights found it, instantly striking the metal with a brilliance that felt larger than the hall itself. Conversation halted mid-sentence. Someone gasped. Chairs stopped scraping. Even the dust in the sunlight looked like it stopped moving. Devon stepped forward from the second row, posture straightening, as if lifted by something instinctive and old. His voice softened into respect the moment he saw it. Sir, is that a Navy Marine Corps medal? Walt held his jacket at his side, shoulders squared yet humble. I keep it, he said quietly, for someone who didn't come home. The words settled across the room, like a flag being lowered, slow, deliberate, carrying a weight nothing else could match. Ellie gripped the edge of a chair, eyes shining at her grandfather, finally understanding what he had never put into long stories. Yet no one spoke, not a whisper, not a footstep. The hall froze around him. Ms. Whitcomb's clipboard dipped in her hand. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if the rules she had rehearsed all week suddenly had no place here. Yesterday, protocol had pressed on him, with the weight of officious certainty. Today, truth raised the whole room in a single breath. Devon took another step forward, heels clicking once against the glossy floor, before he stopped out of respect. Sir, he said again, quieter this time, Why didn't you wear it before? Walt looked down at the metal thumb brushing the worn edge. Because it isn't about me, he answered. It's about the man who earned it, and the promise I carry for him. A long, gentle silence followed, deep enough that you could hear the soft hum of the lights above the settling creak of the rafters, the breath of every person caught between awe and apology. No one sat. No one breathed. The hall held its breath with him. Word of what happened during rehearsal swept through the community faster than anyone expected. By evening, people whispered in the grocery line, in the library doorway, outside the diner, where coffee cups clinked under soft lights. The story was simple and astonishing. All at once, the quiet janitor, who never raised his voice, carried one of the rarest medals in the service, and he'd worn it only to honor someone else. By morning, the hall felt different. Conversations softened when Walt passed. Eyes lingered not out of judgment, but out of recognition, finally seeing what had been there all along. Devon found him near the equipment closet, folding chairs with that same patient touch. He cleared his throat once before speaking. "Sir," he began, voice lower than usual, I interrupted the wrong man." Walt paused, hands resting on the top of the chair. A long breath left him, not heavy, just thoughtful. "We all learn, son," he said gently. "That's how we grow." Devon nodded, shoulders loosening as though he'd been waiting for those words. He helped stack the last few chairs without being asked, each motion quieter than the last. Miss Whitcomb approached next, her clipboard held against her chest instead of at her soon. "Mr. Kerrigan," she said, her voice softer than it had been in days, "I owe you an apology. I misjudged the situation. You have every right to wear your medal during rehearsal during the ceremony, whenever you choose." Walt simply dipped his head. "Thank you, ma'am." But she continued, glancing toward the stage. "There's more. The community council talked last night." A few volunteers stepped closer, their expressions warm with something like resolve. The oldest veteran in the hall cleared his throat. "We'd like to install a plaque," he said, "in honor of the man you carried that medal for. A permanent place in this hall, so people remember him and the kind of friend he had." Walt's hand drifted instinctively toward the medal beneath his jacket. His fingers stopped just shy of touching it. The idea seemed to land slowly, as if he wanted to hold it carefully before believing it. He swallowed once, eyes lowering with a gratitude too deep for quick words. "But that's not all," the veteran added with a gentle smile. Walt looked around the hall, then the rows of chairs, the polished floor, the sunlight stretching across the stage like an open invitation. He felt a quiet settle inside him, not the lonely kind, but one that came from being understood after years of keeping things close. Ellie slipped her hand into his. "Grandpa, they really see you now," she whispered. He gave her a small nod, steady as ever, but his eyes carried a softness that hadn't been there the day before. He took in the faces around him, Devon standing straighter than usual, volunteers pausing their tasks, veterans watching with the respect earned only through time and truth. Walt exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to clear the dust from every corner of the hall. But the plaque wasn't all they had, one more surprise coming. The official ceremony filled the main hall with a soft, golden glow, the kind that made the edges of every flag and every face look touched by memory. Sunlight met stage lights in warm layers, washing over the rows of veterans' families, students and neighbors who'd gathered with a reverence that felt deeper than tradition. At the far end of the aisle, near the place where rehearsals had once stumbled and rushed, a new plaque stood against the wall. Its metal surface caught the morning light, steady and solemn. "For the quiet men who carry others home." The words sat beneath a framed replica of the medal, an exact copy of the one Walt kept close to his heart. Its ribbon hung straight, untouched by fingerprints, the brass polished to a glow that honored more than a single life. People filed past it in slow, respectful motion, their gazes lingering as though they wanted to memorize every curve of the inscription. Ellie stood closest, her hand brushing the base of the plaque, as if testing whether something so meaningful could truly belong in a place everyone could see. Devon stepped beside her uniform, crisp posture, tall in a way that wasn't about show, but about gratitude. "You know," he said gently, "a young Marine once interrupted him, and now the whole hall stands still for your grandpa." Ellie smiled, eyes bright. "It should have stood still earlier," maybe Devon admitted. "But it's standing now, and it's standing for the right reasons." The soft shuffle of the crowd quieted as Walt walked toward the plaque. He'd dressed simply, pressed shirt, clean jacket, nothing meant to draw attention. But attention found him anyway, moving toward him the way light moves toward open space. He stopped just inches from the plaque. The hall eased into silence, the same silence that had once followed the reveal of the medal. But this time it wasn't shock. It was understanding. Walt lifted his hand and set it against the metal frame, fingers tracing the words, as though he were carrying them into memory. His breath was steady, his shoulders relaxed, his expression touched with something like peace. "Respect goes further when it's quiet," he said, voice low enough that the room leaned in to hear it. No one replied, not out of hesitation, but because silence felt like the right language. A warm kind of quiet, the kind that honors without demanding, that thanks without needing applause. The ceremony moved on with soft music, gentle speeches, a roll call of names that meant everything to those who'd gathered. But each time someone passed the plaque, they paused. Even children hushed their voices without being told. Even the dust drifting through the sunlight seemed to slow, as if remembering what had once stopped the hall completely. And Walt stayed near the plaque for a moment longer. Ellie at his side, Devon a respectful step back. The three of them formed a small line of connections at the front of the hall. A reminder that stories don't always begin where people notice them, but they often end where hearts finally understand. If this story moved you, share it forward. The main hall glowed with that soft morning gold as Walt lingered beside the new plaque, the choir warming up in the distance, and the steady shuffle of neighbors filling the room with gentle gratitude. Still, there was something quieter in the way he rested his hand on the replica medal. A kind of promise kept like a lamp glowing in a winter window for the one who never came home. Devon watched from a respectful step back, realizing that the calm man he once misread had been teaching the hall how to stand still long before anyone noticed. Then the crowd eased into silence, letting the truth settle the room, the way sunlight settles dust, slow and certain. And as the ceremony began, you could feel it in the hush around him. A quiet hero remembered, a legacy carried forward.